Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Wednesday, February 11th, 2026, and today we have a whole different kind of show for you. Back in November, Hannah and I headed to Columbia, South Carolina for the Carolina Farm Stewardship Association's Sustainable Agriculture Conference, which is a great group to connect with. Also, if you're in the Carolinas, we had a blast there, but I also recorded my talk on maintaining living soils. And anyway, we thought we would share that whole thing, so why not on a Wednesday? So indeed, we'll dive into that now, and we hope you all enjoy. Here is me in South Carolina talking about soil, kind of like I do everywhere, even in South Carolina. So let's do it. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming out today. We're going to talk. This is going to be the subject of, conversation today. But I know, having spoken with some of you already at the conference, we have a range of what you're doing in terms of how much you're farming, or if you're farming, or if you're working with food organization, all across. It looks like, just from what I can see, kind of across the spectrum. So we'll talk about a bunch of different stuff. I know it may be hard for some of you all to see some of these slides over here. So if you want to, you can come over. Or in the middle of it, if you want to move over, that's fine too. What I want to do today, though, is kind of give some practical application to the principles of soil health. Because when I started growing, everybody was like, yeah, use cover crops, or don't till your soil. And I was like, cool, how? And so I want to talk a little bit about that. Obviously, that is everything I do, and that it would take months to cover all this, everything, right? So we'll do our best, and if you have specific questions, we'll kind of, either I'll stop a couple times as we go through, or we'll stop at the end and leave plenty of time for questions. I tried to make this presentation not too long so that the things that interest you and you want more technical details about them, I'm happy to go into that. Or if you want more bigger picture philosophical stuff, we can do that too. One of the ways that you can sort of build on the stuff that we talk about today, I do a daily podcast 5 days a week. It's called Growers Daily. You can find it wherever you get podcasts, or you can find it on YouTube. I've been doing it this almost over a year now, and I've been doing podcasting since 2018 in some form, interviewing people. We try to do about one interview a week on this show, but then the rest of it is me talking about everything from how to grow carrots to how to terminate cover crops and some bigger picture stuff too. So we try and make it light and fun as best we can with nerdy farming information. Also, the Living Soil Handbook, I wrote this, I finished it in 20, published in 21. And this has more detail about how the principles work and what they look like in practice. Because like I said, the biggest deficit for me was always that there just was not enough information about the how. I have lots of philosophical stuff about, soil life and, the soil food web and all these things. And I'm like, that's awesome. But literally, how do I do it? So that, that's a big part of what I want to talk about today. But obviously, as you have questions, as they come up, just let me know towards, when I take those question breaks. A little bit more about me. We do, this was our farm 2 years ago. It's changed a little bit, and I don't have my cat toy thing, pointer, which is good in case anybody brought their cat. But this is our farm. It's we're in central Kentucky. 6B is our climate. It's a little bit of a cusper on 7A, but we get really hot in the summer, really cold in the winter. We're classic Midwestern state in that way, even though Kentucky doesn't really want to call itself Midwestern. But basically, it's a, we do 3/4 of an acre. Well, and this, I guess we were close to an acre. We've brought it back down to now we're doing this section here, and then the rest has gone into perennials in the back there. Because my wife and I have kind of shrunk the farm as I do more of the educational stuff. So we've shrunk and picked up a couple wholesale accounts and just kind of focused on a few easier ones. And so the rest of it's gone into perennials. We're doing more fruit trees and that sort of stuff. So that's going to take some time to get going. But we still do kind of intensive market production. And then you can't see a big tunnel here on the right-hand side. Actually, we've moved some of these tunnels, so it's changed a little bit. And Yeah, we do mixed vegetables. At the time we were certified organic. We dropped our certification because we didn't need it for where we're selling now. But we are selling, it's probably about, I don't know, right now it's like an intensive third of an acre in production. And all right, so I'm going to go through kind of some of our guiding principles of how we manage our soil. And it's three, and this is also how I designed the book. Kind of these three principles are the concept, and I didn't come up with them. Nature did that. Good on it. And then also conservation agriculture, like identified these. Obviously, everybody has different amounts, right? Dave Brown, I think, says like 5 or 6, and Helen Attow says like 10 principles. Doesn't matter. They're all, these three kind of cover the basics, the bases. I'm going to go through these kind of real quick, and then we'll talk about each, we'll kind of break out each one individually. But first one is keep the soil covered as much as possible, right? So that, in this case, it's cover crops, mulches, anything that's just kind of preserving that moisture, and we'll talk a little bit about like why mulch a little bit in a second. Second one is keep the soil planted as much as possible. We want living plant roots in the soil as much as we possibly can. For us, that's a lot of different, that can look a lot of different ways. We use living pathways, which I'm not going to tell you is like my recommendation, but for us has been really helpful because we're on a slight slope. And like Kentucky, I was kind of describing it earlier, it's like starts in Appalachia, and then as you go west, it kind of just gets super hilly. That's where we live in the hillies. And then it gets really flat out west when you get closer to like Illinois. So like right there in the middle, it's this weird hilly, everything looks like a mogul's course. That's kind of where we farm on a mogul's course. So like it's just bumpy and hilly and it goes downhill. So for us, living pathways have made a lot of sense. And I can talk a little bit about that. Again, take notes if there's anything that you want me to dive a little bit more into how we technically manage it, happy to do that. Third principle, keeping the soil disturbed as little as possible. I change how I structure that sentence here as much often, but basically you don't want to disturb it as little as you can, right? And we'll talk a little bit about what disturbance is, what tillage is, what good disturbance is, because there are disturbances that are helpful, beneficial, and then there are disturbances that are harmful. And the bonus one, the one that is kind of included in all of them in some regard, is keep everything you do as diverse as possible. The inputs that you put into your soil, compost, the types of what you put into your compost, and the different types of compost that you use, everything from the amendments, like if you're using alfalfa meal, you may also want to add some different amendments. And then just biology, different plants, like keeping it as diverse as possible with the key principle, the hidden principle, being as possible, right? When we get dogmatic about these things, like we can come and we can say like, this is how I want to do it, and your soil is going to be like, yeah, but I'm clay or I'm sand and I need these things and you're not giving them to me. So if we bring our dogmas to the soil, we can't do that. Like this is a relationship that you have to build with your land, and you have to ask your land what it needs. And if you just come in and you're like, this is what we're doing, your land is either, maybe it'll respond well, but maybe it'll be like, yeah, I'm not on the same page as you. Like we can't do deep compost mulching because your compost access is terrible. Like you have bad compost access. So like if you pour that on the soil, maybe you end up with a persistent herbicide that basically makes it impossible for you to grow anything for years. So like there are nuances to this, and the big thing like I always want people to take away is like, don't be dogmatic about it. Because this is a lot about asking your soil what it needs. And another thing that maybe I said 3 principles, but now I think I'm up to 5. But if all of this, if whatever you're doing isn't working, it's not leading you to, in this case, me playing soccer with my kids on the solstice in June, right? Like busiest time of year, I'm out like in the afternoon playing soccer with my kids. If all of this, whatever your interpretation of that is, doesn't lead to you being able to do the things you want and love, then like try something new, try something different. Don't feel like you have to stick to it because you decided you're no-till and that's what you are and that's like your identity. Don't worry about it. Ask your soil what it needs and try and make it as efficient as possible, and then you can get to having like living a normal life, which should be the goal for all of us, right? I mean, I was talking to Noah yesterday. I don't know if he's in here, but we were Noah from Wild East talking about like just if you have every hour in the day to farm, you'll use all those hours. That doesn't mean you'll use them well. You can get that same amount of work done if you only give yourself 8 hours to get it done. So like restricting your time is a huge, important factor in how we farm well, how we farm efficiently, is being like, I'm going to end at 4 p.m., tough. Whatever's done is done. And then that way you're like, I have to get this done. And you're just going to do it more efficiently. You're going to be like, well, this time I'm not going to take just one bin out to the field. I'm going to take all of my bins out to the field, harvest them, put them on a cart, and bring them back, right? So you're trying to speed up things and make it, make your life more efficient. And context is absolutely everything. So this is kind of hard to see for some of you, but the farm on the right, super beautiful soil, like silty loam. I put compost application a couple inches and kind of reapplied that over years, and we just had a nice mulch there, and I could dip my arm into the soil up to my shoulder with no problem. After a few years, right? Beautiful soil, drained well, held its moisture well. It had 8% soil organic matter. It started out with 5, and that's a foot down. It was the most amazing soil I've ever grown on. It was on a ridge, though. It was very windy, so things dried out really quick, like the plants would. Also, we would use tarps, and the wind would use those tarps to throw them at our neighbors, which wasn't always the most convenient thing. But so it was there were a lot of challenges with that property. It was very rocky. The soil had these giant limestone rocks in it. But and in this farm on the left-hand side, this is our newer farm, and it's heavy clay soil, ridiculously heavy. It has compaction areas all over it. There were horses on it. They did some tractor work at some point that I can't tell why or what. But they, it's really intense, and it's still really, really hard to farm this property. Those properties are 15 minutes apart from each other, and they could not be more different. So when we're talking about how the importance of context, that's something you have to think about. Your neighbor, even their property or 10 minutes or 15 minutes down the road is not going to be the same as yours. Evaluating your context is something I talk about in the book, but it's just that's kind of the key to all of it, is figuring out what you have, what materials you have access to, what your soil is, how it operates. All of that is exceedingly important. All right, so we're going to go through each of these principles kind of individually. And the first one being keeping the soil covered as much as possible. This is kind of basic stuff, but if we can get into some more of the details. But mulch, right? We all know why mulch, right? The mulch helps to protect the soil, so it can be protect the soil and from the sun, protect the soil from the wind, protect the soil from erosion. It provides habitat to microbes, right? Depending on the mulch that you're using, provides a place for them to live. It provides food for them, feeds the soil, right? As it breaks down, decomposes, depending on what mulch you're using. If you're using any sort of organic mulches, they are eventually going to break down, feed the soil, turn into soil organic matter, and cools or warms the soil depending on the mulch that you're using. This is an important factor because one of the things I talk about with context, a lot of times people will say yeah, I tried to mulch with straw and nothing grew, nothing in my garden grew. And then they'll tell me they're in Canada, and I'm like, you put a really light mulch down on your soil, and then it basically stayed really, really early springtime temperatures all summer until the late summer, and it's not really a surprise that your tomatoes didn't do well because the soil never warmed up. So it can warm the soil, the contrast to that would be maybe us here in warmer climates where we are, especially where we are now. You're putting down a compost mulch or something, and you're planting sensitive lettuce crops into that in the middle of the summer, and you're they're just burning up, and it's partially because it's black compost, and so that's that it's getting hot, and it may be burning your plant roots. There are all these different considerations with that. Reduces weeds, right? I think it can, and it can not. It can add weeds depending on what it is, and that could be with compost too, which we tend to think of compost as something that brings in, it comes weed free and all these things. But I didn't have lamb's quarters on one farm until I bought compost, right? And I was like, oh, okay, well, cool. Now we have lamb's quarters. Great, delicious weed, but not my favorite in the garden. But yeah, that's part of the challenge with that is that you have to know what the mulch is and what the risks are. But a good mulch should reduce your weed populations. Hopefully, for us when we were at our peak, when we were doing that full acre, cultivation for us, I don't know, it was 15 minutes, 20 minutes every 10 days. Like it was nothing. And there were a few times that things would get out of hand, right? It happens to everybody, like you just make some mistakes, or I would let the living pathways go a little long. But, like when we were at our peak production, it was nothing. Like it just did barely a line item. And all right, so we'll talk a little bit about some types of mulches because there are some considerations. One of the things is you all probably have access to different mulches than I do. Here in South Carolina, maybe you even have access to things like rice hulls, rice mulches, straw rather, or we had some friends up north who use salt marsh hay, which is amazing because the weed seed in the salt marsh hay doesn't germinate without salt present. So it's basically all the benefits of hay, which hay to me is the ideal mulch if it didn't have all those weed seeds in it. Because it's green, it's like if it feeds livestock over the winter, it'll definitely feed your garden. To me, it's like one of the ideal mulches, but the weed seed issue is the challenge. So anyway, yeah, you all may have access to different mulches than we do in Kentucky. Obviously, we have a lot of horse manure in Kentucky. There's good and bad to that because there's also a lot of persistent herbicides that make their way through with horse manure. But let's talk about some of them real quick. Compost. I love compost as a mulch, but it's complicated, right? Because it's, depending on the type of compost that you're using, it can be heavily phosphorus heavy. So you can, sort of end up with a situation where you have a really, really heavy phosphorus concentration in your soil tests. Phosphorus is not super mobile in the soil, but let's say you live near a waterway and you get a heavy rainfall or a hurricane, right? And it washes all that compost into a waterway. Suddenly, that's a different story. Suddenly that's pollution. And that's something we want to avoid, right? So you do have to be thoughtful about this stuff. If you're like, I love compost, I want to do compost mulching, and you've got a creek right there, I'm not going to advise you to do it. Because you can use some compost, right? But you really do need to manage those phosphorus levels because then that can cause a very serious level of pollution. And same with nitrogen, right? If it's a very nitrogen-heavy compost, it can do the same thing, but nitrogen's a little bit more mobile. So it becomes even riskier when you end up with around drinking water and those sorts of things. But as a mulch in general, especially when it's coupled with a carbonaceous material, like in a lasagna style, in this case, we put down some paper mulches. This was just, I don't have my pointer, but on the top of the screen there, you can see that was just, this is after the winter. I think I just mowed that. Actually, no, this is going into the fall. I just mowed that, put down this, paper mulch, and then put down, I think that was hay. Yeah, hay over top of that. And then we covered that with 6 inches or so of compost and then planted our garlic into that. It's the best garlic crop I've ever had. And then that was over the winter. So this would have been late September, early October when we did this. And the production was great. And then those beds were started. Now, and for whatever reason, we never had issues with the weed seed out of this particular hay. But, that I don't know if that was a combination of weed, just like the compost mulch kind of blocking it out, or weed seed predators or that sort of thing can be a factor too. But we never really had terrible issues with weeds in this particular plot. But so that is one way you can use it. Some things just about compost. This is to me kind of the most important thing to talk about because it's like the ideal mulch if you really it's immediately a plantable mulch. It warms the soil in the spring. Oftentimes when I'm using this, I'm planting in February when everybody else is waiting to just even have some dry weeks to plow, right? So it gets you ahead of the market. It's it's rich. It feeds your soil. It does all the things, and you can grow right into it. You can put that right over top of a soil and then plant right into it almost immediately, depending on what you're planting. And so I do break it out into 4 different types, and I talk about this in the Living Soil Handbook. But one of the big things that we do at No-Till Growers too is we try and keep all of our information free and accessible to anyone. We are now a nonprofit. No-Till Growers, the thing that the podcast, all that stuff is part of our media company, No-Till Growers. We're a 501c3. The value of that and what we are always trying to do is keep this information free and accessible to anyone and everyone. So when I say it's in the book, you don't have to buy the book to get all this information. You can go to our YouTube, you can watch that, you can listen to the podcast. I want it to be that way. The book is like a fundraiser to us, right? We sell it through there. I don't even sell it through my personal website. We just sell it through there. The goal being that we want all this information to be free and accessible. And it should be, right? And none of this information belongs to me. I didn't invent mulching, right? This is just these are indigenous practices that have been around for millennia. So I want to just help with the current capitalism context and be like, this is how we do it, that we can survive and do well by our ecology.
Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Peaceful Heritage Nursery. If you're looking for hardy and resilient fruit trees, berry plants, or pawpaw trees, then check out Peaceful Heritage Nursery. Peaceful Heritage Nursery LLC is a mail-order nursery shipping premium quality fruit trees and berry plants across the USA. They specialize in resilient, non-GMO plant genetics for small growers. Their diverse selection includes berries, cold hardy figs, passion fruits, gumi, mulberry, and much more. They're famous for their diverse selection of premium quality grafted pawpaw trees. 5-star Google ratings and customer testimonials attest to their commitment to excellence in quality and service. Find them at peacefulheritage.com and join the mailing list. Once again, find them at peacefulheritage.com. Use the promo code NOTILL for 10% off your first order. All right, back to the show.
We separated into 4 different types of compost. If you call a composter and you're like, I want an inoculating compost, they're going to have no idea what you're talking about. But this is helpful for you as a grower to know what you're looking at and how to kind of, identify it. So the 4 different types to me are inoculating, fertilizing, mulching, and nutritional. Inoculating is things like vermicompost, right? This is something that is really highly microbial. You're not going to be able to afford to use vermicompost as a mulch. If you can, we've got a 501c3 that you can donate to. But no, they are, it's amazing. Yeah, you would love to. But there is a point at which, a certain amount of vermicompost is not actually helpful, and that's according to studies, right? But at some point, it's probably too mobile, right? It's very fine, so it washes out really easy. It's something you'd use as an inoculant. You'd use it in your soil mixes, you'd use it in your compost teas or extracts, that sort of thing. And that way you can kind of spread it out over a large space. So that's what I consider an inoculating compost. A fertilizing compost, some of these are not always composts. Like I think of Jean Bonatal up in Cornell. She has done a lot of work with chicken compost and chicken manure compost, and she has this dried chicken manure material. So if you're using a dried chicken manure material and it's with it's OMRI listed or whatever, if you can find that, or you're using it via the rules of using manure, that's something I kind of consider this, because it's something that is high in ammonium, and it's going to be that nitrogen is going to be easily accessible to your plants. I kind of consider that in the same vein as fertilizing compost, or even you can maybe even say vermicompost just kind of fits into that. But something you wouldn't also put down in a real, or just raw manure, right? Or semi-composted manure is something you wouldn't want to plant directly into because it's just too hot, right? It's just going to burn up your plant roots. So that's kind of what I think of as fertilizing compost, and I've kind of adapted my feelings about that a little bit just to include some of those other things that aren't technically compost. Mulching compost. So an example of this is one that we've made a lot in the past is giant pile of wood chips. We'll kind of layer those wood chips. We'll make a new pile, layer a little bit of blood meal, something like that, and basically we'll layer that, spray it down, get it wet, all that stuff, and we'll kind of let that decompose. So it's not like a super rich compost in the end, but what it is a really nice mulching material. And it tends to be pretty carbon heavy, and it serves its purpose. All it's trying to do is retain your moisture, do all the things that we want soil to do without also adding so much phosphorus. There are versions of that I've also made. Sometimes when I do this presentation, I have videos, but honestly, the videos are never very worthwhile, so I've decided to pull back a little bit from that. But there's hay mulches that you can basically just, if you have some spent hay, what is it? Oh yeah, hold on one second.
Chips layered with blood meal and left to sit for
a year. Yeah, so the question was wood chips layered with blood meal and left to sit for a year. I usually do get it pretty wet, with each layer, just because you need that moisture. Microbes need moisture for decomposition. So. But yeah, another version of that would be if you had spent hay and you get that, nice and moist, you could add a little bit of that blood meal, but oftentimes spent hay has enough green in it to decompose readily. So we'll cover that with a tarp. We'll get it really wet, we'll cover it with a tarp and let that decompose. That tarp just traps in that heat and germinates some of those weed seeds. And then it's a little bit hard to work with, but if you let it sit for long enough, it'll be malleable, and then you can, and usually 6 months to a year, you check it. Wood chips take longer. They're just, it's a bigger material. Did I do, nutritional. The nutritional would just be like you're super well balanced. You have a professional making it. This has got all your plant nutrients. Like I think of, like raised bed mix is a good example. Like you find a good composter. My friend Jane Murner up at Earth Care, like they make like a raised bed mix. Like that's like the ideal nutritional compost, but it doesn't have to be that. It doesn't have to have peat or coconut coir or whatever in it. It could just be a compost, but it's really thoughtfully made to be balanced, to be complete. And then that could be, that's your ideal soil covering, right? Because that has everything you need to grow plants, and it's mulching the soil simultaneously. Cons or considerations, I guess. Things like persistent herbicides. These are, if you're talking to a good composter, this is already on their radar. Like they know they're trying to avoid things that could have persistent herbicides that resist decomposition. They tend to be water resistant, so microbes can't as readily break them down. Can be a half-life of anywhere from 6 months to like 3 years. So, some of the, it could come from a range of different things. A lot of times it does come through manure, depending on what the horses ate. It can come through straw. It's good to just have a composter that knows how to avoid those things as best they can, or is also doing longer-term good hot composting, because eventually they will break down. It just takes some time and it takes some thought from the composter themselves. And when I'm talking about, obviously, like I have friends that have been burned by this. They plant these crops and then they're like, this doesn't look like a bean plant really. It's like, it gets gnarly and it doesn't produce like a bean plant because it has been, contaminated. And it's really, really hard to test for it. Like they're often effective in like parts per billion. So like, it's really, really hard you can do it. You can send these off to get tests, but they're really limited in what they can effectively measure. And sometimes it'll come back and be like, no, and you'll be like, I can literally see it in my plants. And they'll be like, yeah, we're not finding any of the persistent herbicides. I had a friend that went through this, ended up having to move off their farm because they had put down so much compost. So this is like, when I say you have to be considerate about these things, like you really do. You have to talk to that composter that you're getting your bulk compost from. And in a situation where like maybe you did get some contamination, there are things you can do to remediate it using cover crops, extracting those cover crops to an area or disposing of them, because they will bioaccumulate some of these chemicals. But yeah, ideally you don't have to do that part. That's not fun. And then obviously I already talked about excessive nutrients and also microplastics. They are everywhere, but they are also in like bulk compost, especially municipal compost, where they'll just take whatever. And you can't always see them. Sometimes you can see them. You'll pick it up and you're like, that compost is usually not blue. That's interesting. That, and then I've found syringes, I've found underwear, I've found all sorts of stuff in our compost. So not always, ideal. But at the same time, there's a part of me that likes the idea of, and I know I talked to my friend Jane recently about this. She doesn't like it when I say it this way, but like it is like this element of sort of waste management, of like taking this quote unquote waste, right? These food scraps and stuff, and then turning them into food, even if there's like, some issues with it, if it's imperfect. Like I like that because I don't like, the food waste is way worse than just like that small amount of contamination. So anyway, let's see, hair straw. Hair straw comes with its own complications in terms of hay. Obviously, we talked about the weed seed. Straw, we didn't talk about the weed seed, but we could, because it can come with wheat, or maybe in this case, it may be rice if you all have any sort of rice straw access. And also persistent herbicides or herbicides in general with something like, sometimes hay is sprayed with broadleaf herbicide. It's not super common. It's best to just know the person selling you the hay. Like if they produce the hay, they'll tell you. Because I don't know, there's this perception that farmers are like going to try to be like, oh, well, I'm going to get a sale here. And maybe some of them will. But for the most part, if you're like, I'm putting this on a garden, and you tell a farmer and they're like, hey, I just want you to know I did spray that with a broadleaf herbicide. Then you're like, cool, I'm going to avoid that because I grow tomatoes and those are a broadleaf. So that's not something that I'm going to want to put on my garden. And most of the time, like my experience is if you're getting directly from the source, they'll tell you. Or like desiccation is a thing with straw. In some areas where it's usually up north, you're probably not going to have to worry about it here unless you're getting this from a wholesaler. But the idea is that people will be finishing their crop, let's say like you're towards the end of a season of a wheat crop and it's like starting to get cold and you need that to finish. You may spray it down with like Roundup or something to desiccate it, to dry it out. and then you harvest it. And then when you harvest that straw, it still has some percentage of that herbicide on it. Now, if they spray what's called a pre-emergent, and they will, like I've had farmers caution me about it before, they're like, I don't spray the crop at all, but I do spray a pre-emergent. Then you're kind of just going to have to decide what your risk level is there, but that doesn't concern me as much. Pre-emergent just means they have a bare field, and then they spray that with something, and then they grew the crop, and then they harvested it. If they didn't spray the material directly, I'm not as concerned about it. Ideally, they're not spraying, but like we all are around conventional agriculture probably. Anybody that's here is growing. We know these can be really great people, and they are trying their best to be like ecologically minded. More increasingly so. But, giving them an incentive, giving them an economy that's like, this is what I want, that helps too, right? If they're like, oh, if I don't spray this, then I can sell it for $1 more a bale, like, that's great, that's good. It creates an economy for them and an incentive. But also, like, if they don't want to, like, upset their neighbors either, so they're not going to lie to you about it, generally speaking. I can talk more and more about that, but I know I have not even gotten to the second principle yet. So cardboard and paper mulch. Cardboard also comes with a lot of risks. Paper mulch, you can get OMRI approved. That would be like the organically approved paper mulches. Cardboard has its own risks in terms of PFAS, which we haven't even really talked about. Generally, you're not going to find that in compost so much because that comes from like sewer sludge, that sort of thing. Like it comes from municipal waste can contain that. PFAS is a forever chemical. It's just not something you want. Plants do bioaccumulate it. It has been linked to various cancers. So it's not something we want in our soil or in our food. Cardboard can contain it because it's actually similar to persistent herbicides. It's actually a water resistant, so it doesn't decompose quite as easily. It's used as fire retardant. All of us are wearing probably something, or many of us are wearing something with some sort of PFAS right now, right? It's everywhere. It's in our bodies right now. It is everywhere, and it's not going to stop because it's on our shoes. Like any sort of waterproofing, all that stuff is PFAS, and it ends up in compost, but also cardboard where they're like waxes and stuff. Like never use a waxed cardboard. Never use a cardboard that has color on it. Never use a cardboard that has any sort of gloss to it. Just if you're gonna use cardboard, it's not my favorite thing, but if you're gonna use it, just use blank cardboard. And it has, there's like when we're talking about combinations, like a cardboard or cardboard paper, and then you're kind of layering that. That can be fine if you're using a good cardboard that you trust. All right, let's see if we can. I'll jump through a couple of these other ones. Wood chips. Wood chips have a lot of potential, right? They're abundant for us. I'm sure you're probably in the same boat. We have a lot of biomass here that falls down. People need to clean it up, and then you end up with a lot of wood chips. So, and they're often free because they're those wood chippers are having to pay to deliver it to like a landfill. So they're willing oftentimes to give it to you for free. So a great resource. You just got to know how to use it. And like I said, I don't use it raw. I do not use it on my bed tops. I don't even really love it in my pathways. And being on a hill, the reason I don't love it in my pathways is because it doesn't stay in my pathways. If I really want to waste like my time, then I put it in my pathways because it'll just wash onto the beds. For us, that's a big reason why we went to living pathways is because you just can't. Like the other things won't stay in the pathways, including bare soil, which will effectively just wash out too. Sip of water real quick. And they're good with high nitrogen sources. Like I mentioned, the blood meal as a way to help decompose it, adding that nitrogen source. But they can also be like, I have a friend, and I don't know if they're still doing this, but I thought it was an interesting idea of basically they were layering wood chips onto new beds, and then over top of that they were adding chicken manure, like fresh chicken manure, and then that was decomposing, and then what the ultimate result was like a plantable bed surface the next year. So it's kind of like a composting in place or decomposition in place by using that extra nitrogen. They're great babysitters. Kids love wood chip piles. If you need, get that and a trampoline, and you're like covered for the season. Shredded leaves are another good one. They can be great, but there's nothing I like less than shredded leaves in my salad mix. Unbelievably painful thing to have to deal with. Because you can get bugs out, you can get aphids out, you could get whatever, but you cannot get leaves, they will hide. So I use leaves very sparingly as a mulch, but it is possible. Like if you're growing, in this case, I think these were zucchini, and they did great in the middle of the summer, right? We mulched it with leaves from the previous year. They were chopped up. Our neighbor mows up all of their leaves. They bring them over chopped. I try and let them decompose as much as possible, but then I lay that out, and it's an amazing soil fertilizer. But it also cools the soil a lot. So like if you're going to put those down in the fall, in the spring, that soil is extremely cold, colder than any of the other mulches that we use. And I don't know why, I think that's just like how leaves roll, but they, that in particular is a very, very cold mulch. But also, the other thing is when you're mowing it up, you often end up with weed seeds. So like this is not always the best weed suppressant for us because our neighbor mows it up, probably with other grasses that are on the ground, right? So ideally you decompose them, but composting leaves is slow. It takes a lot of nitrogen, takes a lot of time, takes a lot of moisture, love it, but it's a tool in the toolbox. It's just not a perfect mulch. And then obviously synthetic mulches. The many things that they don't do, one is that they don't feed the soil, right? They can, if you put a mulch under there, they can help microbes to break it down, but they're not adding anything to the soil, so I don't love that. They're really, really good at weed suppressing, like if you're dealing with bindweed or Johnson grass or Bermuda grass or something like that, and you're just breaking into a plot. And oftentimes I recommend starting with landscape fabric for a year or two and just getting that stuff in check, because it can be helpful. And then, if you don't do the holes like in this picture, if you just do the landscape fabric and set it next to each other, then you roll that landscape fabric and you can terminate cover crops and stuff with that later on. So, by not putting the holes in it. And oftentimes when you're putting the holes in it, you're using, flame, and you're breathing in like plastic smoke, which is not great. And then also microplastics. We don't want to add more of those to our soil than we already do through our compost and just through the air, right? They're everywhere at this point. Same with PFAS, and we don't want to contribute to that any more than we have to. I think that's going to be a significant issue in the future as more and more plastics break down in the ocean and in our bodies and from our clothing. We're finding it in the human placenta. We're finding it in the brain. Like it is in your body right now. It's in everyone in here. And there's only so much you can do because it's not what you're eating. It is in the air. Those are the things I don't want and don't like to contribute to. So preferably we don't use these, but there is a time and place to for a tool like this. All right, questions on mulches before we go to keeping it planted as much as possible? Yes?
What do you plant in your living pathways?
Yes, the living pathways. I don't know that I have a slide. Maybe I have a slide coming up. If I do, we'll stop again. But I tried a bunch of different stuff in the living pathways. Ultimately, the thing that I've realized is nature doesn't care. Like I've tried clover. Clover's great, right? But clover's only great for a period. When you get into that peak of the summer, it's like it chills out and whatever else is underneath. So maybe you could add some sort of good summer grass, or maybe I've been trying teff a little bit as like a supplement. But the reality is ultimately there's nothing, especially in a climate like ours, right? In a warm climate that has a long season, and you have a longer season than I do. Nothing is going to last the whole time. There's not one crop, there's not two crops. You're going to need 3 or 4 crops to really do it. So what I've done is just stop worrying about it. And so I do the clover. I put down a little bit of fresh white clover in the fall. And next year I'm going to try some teff in some areas. I tried it on some bed tops. I really like the idea of teff. It's very cool, little grass, very pretty. But I haven't figured out exactly how to utilize it yet, but I'm going to play around a little bit with that. I think perennial rye could be another option that you could put down in the fall with your clover, but you need something for the summer, and the summer's the hard one because there's very few summer grasses that I want around my plants, or very few summer plants that spread and sprawl. We've tried chamomile, amazing to smell, right? If you've ever harvested in chamomile pathways, you just fall asleep. It's awesome, but it doesn't last, right? It just, it can't take the footprints. There's nothing that I've found that does it all. So I think if we were in a colder climate, that would be a lot easier. I know a lot of my friends up in Canada, etc., they do all right with just doing clover. We just haven't found that. And honestly, I haven't really needed to. If you manage it well, it doesn't really matter what's there. It's kind of what I've learned. Even if it's Bermuda grass, or it's, Bermuda grass. We have a spot of Bermuda grass that's right next to a bed, And it's never really gone in the beds because I kind of let it grow tall, and then I mow it tall, and I just keep that, edged right there, and then we flip those beds so much that it just never really is a problem. And I mean, I'm not saying that's going to be the same thing for you all because we are a little bit colder than you. That helps. Like the further south you get, the more Bermuda grass gets empowered, unfortunately. But yeah, that is, that hasn't been a huge issue for us. Johnson grass hasn't been a huge issue because it hates mowing. We don't have bindweed, so that's been helpful. But yeah, I mean, the one issue that we've found is the early spring is our biggest challenge because chickweed and purple nettle. And those are the ones, chickweed in particular, is just like sneaky. And purple nettle's not as bad, but like even if we mow it really well and we edge it really well, like the chickweed kind of finds a way. Quackgrass has had some moments where it like will slip in a little bit, just kind of root under. But I mean, the thing with managing living pathways for us is we're flipping these beds. We only do living pathways where we're doing bed flips every other like month and a half, right? We're doing 55, 60-day crops. So like maybe there's some weeds there, but I'm coming through, I'm cutting out my lettuce, I'm picking the weeds, and then I'm planting the next crop, and it's like it never, they just stay where they are, and then we're edging it. In this case, like obviously there's a lot of interplanting going on here, probably too much. There's some Salanova lettuce with some green onions. We try and plant as diversely as possible, and it really all comes down to photosynthesis. We're not going to I'm not going to give you like a high school biology class here, but just some basics, like it's taking water, sunlight, and carbon dioxide and turning that into glucose, and glucose being the building blocks of all life. Anything we can do to enable better water management, right? You taking each one of those each one of those individually, like water, your water management's got to be good for photosynthesis to be effective. Sunlight, your sunlight has to be the right levels for photosynthesis to be effective. What does that mean? Like we can't really control the sun, but we can kind of, right? We can use taller plants or trees to diffuse sunlight. We can use tunnels to help diffuse sunlight, like high tunnels. We can do some interplanting. That helps to diffuse the sunlight down to the lower leaves, so you're maximizing that sunlight. And carbon dioxide, right? Your soil has to be alive. Like we talk about, like your good soil is breathing out tons of carbon dioxide all the time. And it should be, because your plants, if you have it planted all the time, are taking it back up. And we're going to talk about tillage in a minute, but that's a big thing with tillage. Like when you till a plot, you release a ton of carbon dioxide. But if you don't have any plants there to reabsorb it, you're losing your carbon dioxide. You're losing all the hard work of the plants. And what they're doing is they're turning that into glucose. This is the only slide my kids like. But glucose, just think of it like that is the building blocks of all life. That is your plants, that is your fruit, that is your flowers, that is, that's what that goes. But it's not just like all the above ground stuff, all the roots and etc. It is also the roots, but also the root exudates, these little, carbonaceous cocktails that the plant makes to attract certain microbes. And then you get this, you become part of this, by having these plants in the soil, you become part of this ecosystem by taking all this carbon, turning it into glucose, and turning it into other things. And you think about it, like one of the things, the story that I like to digress on a little bit is, when colonists first arrived in America, they were just blown away by the abundance. Blown away, just absolutely had never seen anything like it. Birds enough to block out the sun. Rivers teeming with life, like salmon, you could reach in and grab one, right? All of these things, and we tend to think of this as we know, like indigenous agriculture was really ingenious, but this isn't because Native Americans were operating at like 10, 20% organic matter or anything crazy, right? Like 8, 9, depending on where you were, like normal, like pretty high, but like nothing crazy. But the reality is, what happens is as these exudates, as this carbon goes into the soil, right, it gets eaten by microbes, in this case microarthropod, gets maybe eaten by an earthworm that maybe gets eaten, a sliver of that turns into the earthworm, and then that earthworm gets eaten by a chicken, and then ultimately, we get an egg. And what you get is that all that carbon that's getting pumped in the soil, it's not staying there, it's becoming other life, right? Because the soil, once it gets full, once it's like, I've had enough, it starts putting that carbon into other life forms. So it starts putting that into the worms, into the microbes, into the worms, into the chickens, birds, etc., into the moles, the voles, all the things, and then slowly it goes out. So like once a soil is sort of what we call like sort of saturated, right? That doesn't mean it stops. that means it starts putting it into other life. And that, to me, is always what we're trying to go for when we're talking about keeping it planted as much as possible. We're trying to create that life in the soil that goes into, that goes into all the rest of the life in the world. That's how you end up with birds enough to block out the sun, right? By keeping the soil planted as much as possible and managing it really well. And then you end up with us, like just, in this ecosystem, being a part of it, being stewards of it in the way that indigenous people have been for millennia.
Today's episode is brought to you by Tend. Farming is hard, running it shouldn't be. Meet Tend, the purpose-built platform built by farmers for farmers. Plan your season, map your farm, and track every task from seed to sale. No more spreadsheets, no more guesswork, just smart, seamless workflows. Tend adapts to your farm, 1 acre or 100. Real-time inventory, sales, labor, tracking, traceability, and analytics all in one place. You grow food, flowers, fruit, and more. Tend helps you to grow smarter. Start free today at tend.com. That's TEND.com. All right, back to the show.
It is about diversity. I don't think that it is about diversity, right? But it isn't about diversity so much that it's too complex to manage. I've done that. It's too complex to manage, right? Like when you're trying to do 15 different interplants and you have beets with your underneath your tomatoes, and then you have some green onions shoved in there and some basil at the ends. Like you can do that and it can work, especially on a small scale, but it's a lot to manage. It's a lot, especially when your organic certifier is like, what's your rotation now? So as much like this is with the living pathways, you can see there's like this bed over here, beets with lettuce, and then the bed that's under the shade cloth has beets and lettuce with it. I think there's potatoes next to that we're following like a arugula crop or radish crop, I can't remember. And then, peppers, and then just abundance, right? It's very abundant, but it is really hard to manage that. So diversity within reason as much as possible. Like you want to have a good crop rotation. They're like people talk about not rotating their crops. It's possible sometimes if you have a really healthy soil to get away with that for a little while. But the idea is you're missing out on some of the diversity that you could be bringing in, some of the microbes that can protect your soil from various pathogens. So you want to bring in as much of those tools as you can to your soil, and then bringing in as much life. And I don't know why it says again here. I think I deleted a thing, but yeah, all of these principles are about reducing compaction and increasing and protecting from erosion, all that stuff. It's not just mulch that does that. Plants do that as well, right? Your plant roots really hold your soil in place, and I think that's hugely important. As a grower, I've seen where when I flipped a bed, the water washes out, but when I flipped a bed without tilling it, and those roots are still in there because I'm leaving the plant roots in the soil after I harvest. Like let's say I've got a bed of lettuce, right? And we grow a lot of lettuce. It's just an easy crop for us, and we're really good at it in the summer when everybody else doesn't feel like bothering with it. So it's been a great market for us. So we'll cut out our lettuce at the base. We'll leave all those plant roots in the soil. We'll get a heavy rain, soil doesn't go anywhere. Then we replant the next crop, and we're good to go, right? There's some nuance to that, right? It's not easy to plant a crop after there's roots in the soil. You have to be thoughtful about how you're going to do that, what the next crop is going to be. But the idea being that those living roots that are still in the soil after we harvested, one, it doesn't take any time for us to just get the crop out and then put another one in, but also it just holds it in place a little better. And we get the same kind of rainfalls you do, those 3-4 inch rainfalls this summer. In July, it stopped raining, but we already had 44 inches of rain at that point. And then it started raining again in August with a 4-inch rainfall, just immediately. What do you do about that? I don't know. It's really tough. This helps. But we are all in a really difficult climate that there's no perfect solution to. And everybody's going to do it a little differently, and I think you all should, because like I said, context is everything. But that's one of the challenges for us. It's just, we never know. We're going to go dry, and then we're going to go to 4-inch rainfalls immediately. All right, I know I kind of breezed through keeping it planted as much as possible because planting is kind of what we do. Any questions on that, just generally speaking? Yeah.
So when you're doing interplanting, how do you manage crop rotation?
Yeah, I've done it a few different. Okay, so the question is how do I manage crop rotation when you're doing interplanting? I've done it a few different ways. Usually we just take those two crop families out of the picture of that bed. We do it bed by bed. So like, we've done it block by block. So it would be like Solanaceae and so like your nightshades. And then also, like maybe we put beets, green onions, and arugula with those crops. Like that's like a block. And then that rotates out and then it goes into lettuce and then that rotates out. There's no easy way to do it. It just depends on what you're growing. Because for us, like we also had a good pattern where, I know this is kind of convoluted, but like where we separate, I wish I could show you the main part of the farm. Basically like we have a fast crop production area and a slow crop production area. So our furthest plots away from us were like garlic, potatoes, sweet potatoes, corn, that sort of stuff was like really far out. And then our closer stuff was like beets, lettuce, and it still is kind of this way, but beets, lettuce, green onions, radishes, that sort of stuff. And then if you have that list, then you just keep it in order and the next crop is the next crop on the list. And then you just show that to if you're doing organic certification. If you just can demonstrate that you're thoughtful about it, they most are, at least we're certified through KDA, Kentucky Department of Agriculture, we were. As long as you could demonstrate that you were doing some sort of rotation. I just like the diversity. So oftentimes when you're interplanting, if you did like a slower crop like tomatoes, for instance, and then you had beets, whatever comes in next is not a Solanaceae or beets or whatever. Like it would just be the next crop. It's complicated. That was one reason that we stopped doing it quite as intensively. We still do like utilize that space because interplanting is genius, right? Like, because if you put a tomato plant in the ground, you have space next to those tomato plants. Even if you're on 30-inch beds, we're on 48-inch beds, but even if you're on 30-inch beds, you have space on either side that's doing nothing for 2 months. So you may as well have it do something. So like one of the ways that we use it now is we'll plant carrots in January in the tunnel. Like I'll sow my carrots in January on the sides. And so I'll have maybe, 48-inch bed. I usually do like 3 rows pretty tight on each side of the bed. And then right down the middle, I'll put we'll transplant in like April, we'll transplant our grafted tomatoes right in the middle. I don't have a picture of this, unfortunately. I wish I did, but you can find it on our YouTube and stuff. But and then we'll transplant our tomatoes right in the middle. We'll pull those carrots out before the tomato roots really take over, like in April, like late April. And then the tomatoes take over that bed. That way we utilize that bed for a really high profit crop that can grow pretty well early in the spring. And then the tomatoes take over, and then we just leave it to that. And then we'll use that space where the carrots were to side dress the tomatoes throughout the season. So, and usually just with compost. And we don't really do a lot of fertigation. We'll do a little bit, but like we don't have a great fertigation system. We've never really built one. But that's kind of the idea. Yep.
How does rest fit into your philosophy? Like, do you give your beds a year off every 7 years or anything like that?
We use a lot of cover crops. We don't do any like fallowing really. Like we'll do a cover crop. Even in our high rotation beds, the ones that we're growing so many different crops, those do see like 3 or 4 crops sometimes throughout a season. But then oftentimes what I'd like to do, if one had 4 crops and like maybe I started with carrots in March is when I usually do my first field carrots, so maybe I did carrots followed by a lettuce, and then maybe I did a like late summer radish, and then I did a green onion. That fall I'd probably put that into rye and vetch and just let it chill, and then start early in the spring with tomatoes. If that makes sense. So I don't know that rest is really the right word, because photosynthesis, right? Like I want that as much as possible. But there were times we had 5 plots in our slow rotation area that we could take one out of production every year and basically cover crop it for a year, and then it would go into garlic. So just depended on, I tried a bunch of different stuff. The other thing about our farm is I can't help myself, so I trial everything. I've trialed all sorts of weird stuff. And most of it doesn't work. Some of it does. A lot of it works really well, and some of it's innovative, and it's like really cool, and I'm really excited about it for our farm. But then some of it is like, wow, I just wasted a lot of money and time on that. So, but yeah, I've tried many different things. Let's make sure I'm doing all right on time here. I don't actually know when this goes till. Okay, great. I am doing all right on time.
9:45.
Awesome. All right, so let's talk a little bit, just thinking about, I want to talk a little bit about soil disturbance and how to think about it in a sort of non-dogmatic way. And I think it starts with talking about what happens when you till the soil, because there are disturbances that are really beneficial to your soil. And even a tiller can have that effect in the right circumstances. But it does take understanding what happens to your soil when you till it. So we talked about the microbes, consuming the exudates and all that stuff. One of the things that's happening in the soil, in good healthy soil, is that those microbes are taking microscopic slivers of an earthworm or a root exudate or whatever, of a root of another microbe or whatever, and they're wrapping it in soil particles, and this is what we call soil aggregation. And soil aggregation is good. This is like what holds your water. It's what releases your water in heavy times of rainfall, right? It's this amazing enigmatic substance where, like soil organic matter, where it's like a sieve, right? When you pour a little water in a sieve, it lets it out. But then you can also look in the sieve and you see the water has connected to all the little parts of the sieve. I used to have a picture of this because it's easier to explain. But like you can see that it connects, right, in all the little squares. It like holds a little bit of that water. That's kind of the idea with soil organic matter, is that it allows the heavy rainfall through, but it also retains that water. So what soil microbes are doing is they're wrapping those like microscopic pieces of roots and et cetera in soil particles, and you want that, right? That's like semi-stored or partially stored soil organic matter for food for them later. Once they break into their score, I found some food, and they're going to eat that, and then they're going to give those nutrients or that carbon or that carbon dioxide or whatever it is to your plants. Great, that's what you want. That little bit of nitrogen, that little bit of whatever that the microbes wrapped up. But when we come through with the tiller, right, that's happening that's happening right now to wherever you have cover crops or whatever you have in your ground right now. That's happening. What happens when we till it, right, is we are doing a few different things. One, we're breaking apart a lot of those soil aggregates. We're killing like our earthworms and arthropods and all the things that are in the soil, but we're also, breaking apart their home. We're maybe we're creating compaction, which is like a whole other topic, but we're breaking apart those little soil aggregates, and what we're doing is we're like releasing, or we're whipping in a bunch of oxygen, which encourages oxygen-loving bacteria. Fine, it's good. Those are good in a small percentage, right? But we're basically making an environment perfect for them. We've just released a ton of food, and what they do is they start consuming that carbon that's been locked up, and it releases it in the form of carbon dioxide. Generally, that could be okay, right? If you have plants above the soil to recapture that carbon dioxide, but when you don't, you just lose it. So all that work that your plants have been doing, we kind of just undo it by tilling too heavily. Doesn't mean there isn't a place for tillage, but and I'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, I mean, the other thing with that is you may be creating compaction. Compaction layers both low and high, right? We've seen compaction on the soil surface. I may even have, you may even see soil compaction like I showed you a minute ago, or like that cracking, like anybody who's ever done, I've worked on a tillage farm I've worked on one for 3 or 4 years. When you till the soil and it rains heavily, you get this like kind of crusty layer, and if you break that apart, keeps it from getting too crusty, and it kind of sort of helps preserve some of that moisture a little bit. But that that is a form of compaction. It limits the amount of gas release that can come from the microbes that are creating all sorts of ethanols and all sorts of the carbon dioxide and everything, and it traps that, which is not great for the plants that are in the soil, right? They can't breathe essentially. But it also can create compaction layers really low if it's too wet. If the soil is too wet and you're tilling it, what you can do is you end up with this like really, really deep layer of compaction which can hold water. And that deep layer of compaction, that water that is holding, it can lead to anaerobic conditions. It can lead to the same thing where roots can't penetrate it, get down to the nutrients that they want super low in the soil. So ideally we're not doing that, but there is a place for disturbance. You have to remember, and this is something that took me a little while to appreciate, I think, is that almost every crop we're growing is a recovery species. Its job is literally to recover from, most of these are plants whose job it is, in nature, generally speaking, to recover disturbed spaces. So like, and I say job loosely, obviously I'm not meaning to over personify them, but basically, like a boar comes through, or whatever, and disturbs the soil, and you get a lot of this regrowth of these kind of plants, of beets and whatever else. It depends on whatever the crop is. That's where a lot of our crops come from. They are used to some small amount of disturbance, and they oftentimes excel in a small amount of disturbance. Or it's a forest fire or whatever it is. So that's something like, it is worth appreciating that some amount of disturbance is going to be helpful to the plants that we want to grow, in that they can recover that soil really quickly. But there's both doing it too much and doing it too little. Let's take the broad fork, for example. The sort of story I told there about how, what a tiller in particular, like a really deep tillage effect or a lot of tillage, can do to soil, is like, does the broad fork do that on a small scale, like just forking your soil a little bit just to open it up? Sure, probably breaks apart some of the, the soil fungi, the high feed that are in there, probably breaks it apart a little bit, but it isn't like crushing all of it, right? It's still leaving a lot of it intact. And the other thing it's doing is it's, especially in compacted soil, I'm sure a lot of you are dealing with clay. I'm sure some of you, yeah, anybody? Yeah, right, I feel you. So what that's doing is it's helping to break that clay apart, drop some of the compost layer that you can see on the surface there, drop some of that compost into the soil. Usually I do this before I would add another layer of mulch or something. So I would, the next year after I clear the crop, I would broad fork it and let some of that compost kind of fall down into the cracks. And that slowly just kind of starts breaking that clay apart deeper and deeper, adding those pockets so that the roots can get deeper into the soil. It's a lot of work, right? You couldn't, if anyone in here is on like 60 acres or something, they're probably like, all right, that's not maybe the tool for me. But there are versions of this for larger scale, right? Like a subsoiler. I'm fine with that. Just come through, you have maybe, as long as you're coupling it with that other effect of, like in this case, the compost coming in, great. Like, break up that compaction, you may have to. If you're on sand, you may not have to. Or I've seen compacted sand soils though too, or poorly draining soils. And yeah, I mean, the effects for us is that a tool like this is great because if you use it right and you use it at the right times for long enough, it makes itself obsolete, right? Like, that's the goal. You want to get away from having to do this work. In the beginning, you're going to have to. And I have plots that I still have to do it on. It's frustrating, but it's just the most compacted area of our farm. But it's getting better. And I'm seeing, as I do it every year, that clay that when I first dug into there was like green. It's like that green, gray, gross, like, no oxygen, just gross, stinky clay, now has roots in it, and it's a nice color. But it's not quite soft yet. And it may take time, but this tool is one of those tools that helps me get there. Is there a place for something like the tiller? And this, in this case, is not a tiller. This is a rotary plow. But this is something like, in the beginning of a garden, we will measure the soil organic matter if it's low, or we'll measure for nutrients or whatever. We'll add those amendments to the soil. We'll add a little compost, and then we'll work that soil up, and then we'll never do that again. Right? Like, it is a one-time tillage. Like, it's one step back, but not two steps forward. I would say it's like one step back to never have to step back again. Like, that's the goal, to make these sort of tools or this situation obsolete. You never have to do this again. Now, there are situations too where like I've gone in and just never tilled, right? Just put down some compost and planted right into that. In fact, I think I had that example where we were putting the hay down and then the compost over top. That was a never till situation. I just mowed it, layered the compost, went with that. Great. It works. Doesn't work everywhere. It doesn't work every time. Sometimes, especially when you're dealing with heavy compaction areas, if you just layer a bunch of compost over that and try and plant into it, I mean, you may end up into the situation where you just have a bunch of compost over some really hard clay. So, ideally, you're not doing that. You're just asking the soil what it needs. How compacted is it? Maybe you're taking a penetrometer. You're talking to your extension agents and seeing what they say. You're taking a penetrometer and you're figuring out how compacted it is. That's important. You're taking soil samples and seeing like what kind of soil organic matter it needs. Those sorts of things. And then once you've done that, then you can decide how to go forward. In this case, plowed this, formed our beds, cover cropped it, and then used it the next fall or the next spring. Because that was the best way for us to get into that land, to get that soil to a place that we could plant crops into it. And it just depends. I mean, my advice is often just to simply, address your soil's needs. Like, evaluating soil is about, like, if it were me starting, let me make sure I have enough time to rant about this. All right, I'll take 1 minute. But basically, for me, evaluating soil starts with, like, let's say we've got a pasture, right? I'm going to go in and I'm going to get a soil sample and I'm going to send that off to, To start a garden, I often like to start with like your Kinsey Ag or Logan Labs, or one of those ones that does the base cation saturation ratio, BCSR tests. That's just a good baseline. I like getting us to start there. They give you an idea of like where your nutrients are. Start there, and then check your compaction. You can do this with a rebar. If you just tie a towel around the top, press it into the soil as best you can. If it goes down like this without too much trouble, especially on clay soil, so like 8 to 10 inches, maybe a foot, without too much trouble, being able to use your body weight, then plants will do all right in that. You probably don't have to like seriously worry about compaction. If it stops like an inch into the soil, you're probably going to want to till it, honestly. You're probably going to want to work that soil up, get some good compost worked into it just to keep it apart, and then go from there. And then it's just about monitoring it. And for monitoring it for soil test, I like the Haney test because that gives me a little bit better of an idea of the biology. You could start with that test too. It's good to stay with the same person. I don't really know why I do both, but you can. And then Ward Labs is the one that we use for that. And then sometimes the vegetation that's there will tell you a lot about it. Oh, another important factor in evaluating your soil is doing a drainage test. Just dig a hole, fill it with water, like in a drier time. Not like in the middle of a drought, but like after the soil is dried out enough to the point that you would maybe till it or something. Dig a hole in that soil, like let's say 18 inches by about 12 inches deep. Fill it with water once, let that water drain out, then fill it with water again. If it takes 24 hours to drain, then you've got drainage issues. And you're going to have to think also, there's so many things to say about site evaluation, and I'm assuming that you've already looked and been like, this is not in a floodplain or whatever. All those things that you've already done, but it is also good because the plot that this property here, when we looked at the NRCS soil survey, it was like, awesome, you scored, you got great soil. And we were like, cool. And then we show up and we start digging around, we're like, hold up, this is not exactly what they said it was. Because they know, they have an idea of what the soil is, right? But they don't know what the previous landowners necessarily did to that soil. So, so we were surprised, you've got really bad drainage issues. And so we've had to manage that kind of in situ, realizing it in real time. And that was a huge learning, big lesson for us. I think, and also just, I want to emphasize, don't worry about what other people say, about what you're doing or about what they're doing. 1 second. And then, do whatever your soil needs, ask it what it needs, and then, treat it as best you can according to what you have access to. And I think, and of course, like I said, the book is, a helpful way to get more details on this, the more, granular stuff in terms of planting times, cover crop mixes, all that stuff is all in there. And if you buy it from no-tillgrowers.com, that does support our mission to kind of keep this work, open and free and out in the public as much as possible. So
today's episode is brought to you by Certified Naturally Grown. Certified Naturally Grown is the grassroots certification built by farmers for farmers. C&G gives local growers like you recognition for the commitment of producing food without synthetic chemicals by assuring customers that your practices are verified. C&G's peer review inspection model keeps the cost of certification low while creating opportunities for knowledge sharing amongst a strong, supportive network of like-minded farmers. Apply today to be certified before the season ramps up. Applications processed within 7 days. Learn more at naturallygrown.org. All right, back to the show.
But yes, you had a question.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, how did you fix your drainage issue?
Fix is a relative term. We did a little bit of, we had to manage some of those beds a little bit differently. So you could see in some of that, let me see if I can find we'll just do this one. All right, hold on. Play from this slide. I can't see. Custom from current slide. Let's see if it goes up. Okay, so these, you can kind of see this here. You can see how that's a little bit darker. It's hard because these lights are high, but that's a little bit darker. This is our worst drainage area on this part, and then there's another one kind of high up there. And the big thing that we did was we turned those beds downhill so they would release water more, because this is actually going across the slope a little bit. In the way that a lot of our plots worked out is like I said, it's like a slalom course or a mogul's course, you can imagine, where it's just moundy, so water will collect here, but not here. So what we did was some of these plots, instead of going straight across the hill, we had to turn some of them like this, so you get this kind of like triangle right in the middle. We call that the hedge wedge. And we put like little, maybe there's pictures in there that have like flowers and stuff growing, the bird houses and that sort of thing. Those go in our hedge wedges. But basically just manipulating the beds which way they were pointed to release that water, because they are raised a little bit. It isn't perfect. I mean, I've kind of gone back towards wanting to have them more downhill with living pathways, so that the pathways are not eroding to release that water. And what we haven't done is added any sort of drainage tile. We're trying to avoid that. You can. In really bad situations, you may have to. But we've tried to avoid any sort of drainage tile, French drain, any of that stuff. We've just kind of done, we've tried to just manipulate the water a little bit better with how we situate the beds. We haven't done on contour, obviously. It's not like nothing's curving. Because that's just like, if I was to do that, right, you'd have these big, long, curvy beds, and then I would have row cover, and I would be like, it'd be a nightmare. So I prefer this. It's everything's standardized. It's all 50-foot by 48-inch beds. And the pathways are 20 inches, or actually 18 inches. The thing with the pathways, we manage those with a little electric mower, like push mower. It's fine. I already owned a mower. And if I thought about it, I probably would have just not bought the electric mower and then just made my paths 2 inches wider. I was really trying to maximize the space. Because the thing with 30-inch beds, that's the standard anymore, terrible use of space. It just really is. Like, it's great for, it's great for certain crop spacings, certain ones, but the reality is it's a ton of pathways. It's just all pathways. Every time I see a 30-inch bed garden, all I see is pathways, which is fine. Like, it's totally workable. We did that for years because there are other benefits to 30 inches because you can step over it. But if you're trying to, like, maximize your space, like we were on this, but we only had a certain amount that was actually like really usable. And I took out a whole section. You can't see it. It's over here in between this garden spot and the tunnel is like our soccer field, because I think it's important to have like a little area for us and the kids that's embedded in the garden, that like the kids will be out in the garden and we're playing soccer, we're having fun, or they're throwing a frisbee or whatever. It's just like a play area that you can't, I wish you could see it there, but it's just off to the side. But anyway, yeah, we try to just have that be like everything standardized, everything 48 inches. It's just a better use of that space for us. But like I said, we already had a mower. It's the BCS flail mower, and I wish I'd just used that instead of making my pathway smaller. And I would have lost like a couple beds. But like now that I've shrunk it, I'm like, well, that was dumb. So yeah.
What size are those tunnels? Just wondering.
These were 50 by. These are the Caterpillar tunnels, so these are the 50 by whatever the standard cat tunnel is, like 15. I think that's right? And then what we've done with the tunnels, I don't have any pictures on here of it, but we actually took both those Caterpillar tunnels down and then bought the like wind bracing, but also the trusses, the center purl and all the stuff. We like really, really fixed them to be wind tolerant, because the one thing with those cat tunnels is if you were in like a really wind prone area, it's stress, you will not sleep. And we've had them just like, we had one 3 years ago. We got 75 mile per hour winds, which I know is probably nothing for people that live around hurricane weather, but like smashed the tunnels, just like. So, we fortified them a little bit. So now, yeah, we moved those and they're fortified and they kind of like sit in another spot. Yeah, I think that's the way to go. I like cat tunnels, but if you're in a wind-prone area, like really think about how you set those up and make sure you get the wind bracing and all that stuff.
When you're doing like root crops, sweet potatoes, how do you reduce the disturbance of the soil?
Yeah, this is a good question. Okay, so sweet potatoes, reducing the tillage on that. Potatoes, I've stopped trying to reduce the tillage as much. And the reason is, I've done no-till potatoes and I've compared them to let me describe a little bit about how we do our potatoes. So we have a 48-inch bed. And one year, my employee at the time, Greg, we were looking at this plot. We had a ton of stuff to do. And he's like, I could just see it on his face. He was like not wanting to go and hand plant each of our potatoes like we've been doing. And it works fine, right? You just dig a hole, you pop a potato in there. And I could just see it in his face. It was like, it was hot. It was this May. It turned to July like instantly as soon as it turned to May, and it never stopped. It was just July all summer. And so so I was like, all right, fine. Let's just get the rotary plow out. We'll just dig a furrow. So we dug a furrow on one side of the bed, then we dug a furrow on the other side of the bed, basically pushing the soil into the middle. We put our potatoes down, then we started putting, so basically like the middle of the bed was still intact, but the side, like that, obviously we dug a pretty deep furrow with that rotary plow. I don't know if everybody knows, it's like a corkscrew, shoots soil off to the side. You saw it a second ago. We did that, and then we put those potatoes in there, and then we always do a Jadam microorganism solution, which is basically like a baked potato compost sat in water overnight, and you get this it smells like a light beer sort of the next day. And then we add that. It's a good soil microbe solution. And then we add that with some compost right over top of the potatoes, and then we just hill them back up. I mean, immaculate potatoes. And I was just like, all right, well, fine. Potatoes, you get a pass. That's just, I mean, sometimes, like I said, a lot of these crops are recovery species, and that's when they excel. And so, finding that balance of like, I felt good about it because we still left that soil right in the middle intact, and then we mulched those potatoes, and they were happy all season. And then when we dug them up, we were just like, these potatoes are amazing, and had just a killer, yield, and it was excellent. But like I said, if you're on a small scale and you want to just do the like dig a hole or put them on, dig a hole, put them down in there, add some compost, throw some straw or hay over top, yeah, it's fine. It'll work. But like that was really successful to it. And then we kind of hilled them up a little bit out of that pathway, like just made those pathways really, like made the beds really tall, and then we mulched over top and it was fine. Yeah, and that soil was great. So yeah, I mean there's nuance there, right? Like I said, there's no reason to be dogmatic even within crops. So yeah, question in the back? When we went to harvest the potatoes? Yeah, so let's see, what did we do that year? We have a potato harvester. Yeah, we have a potato harvester for the back of the BCS. I don't remember if we used it that year because basically like where the potatoes were was on the edge of the beds, and I kind of think we just forked them. I think we just forked them, but it wasn't hard because of the soil and the mulch. I think it was pretty easy. Honestly, we may not even forked them. Usually when if we do it right for our sweet potatoes and our potatoes, we pull the plant up. It doesn't always work that way, especially not on our clay soil, depending on where I put them. It can be like, just break the plant. But usually, like, plants die, they senesce, and then we can go in and we can just, like, dig them out. And it's, we're on our hands and knees, we're grubbing for a little while. It's not the most efficient thing in the world. But we don't lose as many potatoes that way. And I just couldn't, I remember that year trying to use that potato plow, even with the weights on the wheels. It just, because they were sort of on the sides of the beds, and we'd raised those beds so much, it was just like a nightmare trying to keep the BCS, like, lined out. So, yeah, I mean, in that case, we just grabbed them, I think. But they were great. It didn't take too long. Yeah. Other questions about?
Potatoes, you did them the same way? Did you make trenches and?
No. Okay, so sweet potatoes. Yeah, so our sweet potato production is a little different. We don't do any sort of trenching or anything for the sweet potatoes. What we do is usually whatever crops were in that bed before, I'll mow them. It depends. Like, I've done it after cover crops, but I don't like planting it into too much mulch, just because rodents love our sweet potatoes, unfortunately. So what we'll do is we'll just mow it, often tarp it, like we have those big silage tarps, and then we'll pull the silage tarp off and just punch the sweet potato slip in, and that's it. And then they grow fine, and they take over the bed, and we just harvest. We usually fork those out too, because without that initial furrow, it's really hard to get enough power with that BCS to get those. And we don't have a sweet potato harvester, so like sweet potatoes grow down, regular potatoes grow laterally, so it's a little easier with those like regular sweet potato harvesters to like get underneath of them, or regular potato harvesters to get underneath of regular potatoes. Sweet potatoes, they just slice them in half. So we just usually end up forking those, which is not the most efficient thing, but oftentimes it's like October and I'm really just like tired and I'm happy to have a job that's just like hanging out in the nice weather and hauling out some sweet potatoes. I'm usually good with it. Yep.
How do you prep the soil when you're planting cover crops in your pathways?
Yeah, well, the clover's nice because it doesn't really need anything. Like, you can just broadcast that right on the soil surface. If, the teff is somewhat similar because it's a pretty small seed. Any of those clovers are pretty small seeds, so they just kind of like work their way right on top. And for instance, like let's say like okra, right? I love growing okra. After the okra, we'll often follow it with like crimson clover. And under basically all I'll do is go down those rows and I'll broadcast a little bit of that crimson clover and then maybe like just rake it in lightly and then it germinates. Then we get a frost, the okra dies, crimson clover takes over, and then we mow all that in the spring. So it just depends on the crop. Like if it's a rye or something, I do have to mow it. I put my flail mower really low, so it's just above the soil surface. So it's almost like tossing the top of the soil a little bit. So it'll mow whatever's there, and depending on it's crop by crop, right? But we'll like mow whatever's there, and we'll either sow the cover crop in that way, like we'll have. Or we'll broadcast it, but the sowing, what we'll use is the Jane seeder. You can buy this, double disc opener that attaches to the bottom, and it'll split through like lettuce roots and stuff really well. So what we'll do is we'll like mow, whatever lettuce is there. It's not going to leave a huge bulky mulch, and then I'll just roll over top of that with that double disc opener and sow some rye and vetch. Yeah, pretty straightforward, I think, in that way. But it depends. Like every bed is different. If I'm pulling out beets or carrots, that's an easy one. But if it's like corn and I have a bunch of stubble there, then I have to get a little creative. Maybe I like rake the corn stubble, like mow it, rake the corn stubble into the pathways, and then it gives me a little bit of a pathway mulch. And then also the cover crop or whatever's next after that, usually after cultivating a little bit if there's some weeds. Yeah, something like sweet corn, that would be, just depends on the crop. Yeah. Still, I mean, with cover crops, it's all about seed to soil contact. So you just have to make sure it is effectively cleared enough for you to get seed to soil contact. Are we done? All right. Thank you.
Shipwreck.
All right, I hope you all enjoyed that episode. I haven't been doing a lot of seminars lately, but maybe if you all enjoy those from time to time, I can do more live seminars and then share them here. Most of that info, obviously, you already have heard here or read in the book, but maybe there was something new in there for you. Let me know what you all think. Also, don't forget, this weekend we are all birding for the Great Backyard Bird Count. You do not have to be a good birder to do this. You just have to download the Merlin app on your phone, and you can follow the link in the description for details. If we count the birds, we know how many there are or aren't, and that will help Cornell and those others to get a good idea of what the state of birds is right now. Otherwise, I think that's it for this Wednesday. Don't forget, No Till Growers is officially a nonprofit 501c3, so donations like any end of the year, beginning of the year, middle of the year donations, they're all tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That is a super easy way to help us out. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and my wife Hannah for absolutely everything in the world. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear.
Didn't know.
Pick up a hat or a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, at notillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, you sign up in the month of February, you would get a shout on the show regularly, but not today because we will actually be saving that for tomorrow. So anyway, thanks for watching and or listening. We will see you then. Bye.
Wild and loud, I was just waiting.